everyone, and in today's video I'm going to be talking to you about the wash, different types of wash and how you can use them in your watercolour art. It's an absolute essential technique for you to master. So let's get started. So fundamentally there are three different ways that you can use a wash, or three different types of wash. We have the flat wash, a very smooth, even colour of watercolour on your paper, really essential if you want to do nice sunny skies. And then we have the graded wash, and that's a graduated wash that goes from dark to light as you go down the page. And lastly, and the one I use the most, is a variegated wash. So during this video I'm going to show you all three washes, how to achieve them. We're going to try some different ways of achieving them, and I might also show you what happens when it all goes wrong. So the first wash we're going to attempt is going to be a flat wash, and we're going to work wet onto dry paper. So I have my paper here, and I've sectioned it off into three parts, and Bailey's decided he's going to watch us today. I've just used masking tape. Just take a sheet of paper, apply some masking tape so you've got three different sections, and I want you to try and see which way of achieving a flat wash works best for you. So we're going to start just by mixing. I'm going to do this in magenta, lovely bright vibrant colour for you to watch, and I want a nice watery puddle. What you don't want to happen when you're doing washes is to run out of the paint halfway down a sky. That would be terrible, and then you're mixing up more paint. The problem you've got with that, if that happens, is the paint will start to dry on you whilst you're mixing up another batch of paint, and then you'll have a telltale line in the middle. Okay, so wet onto dry, load your brush. My pad is flat against the table, and we're just going to go from left to right, stop and pick up. You'll get a little bead of paint at the end, and your brush should be going slightly over the last line that you painted. Okay, so stop, pick up that bead, overlap that line and come back. I kind of find, depends on the size brush you're using and the size paper, how big the sky is that you're painting, is you will choose a brush that's appropriate to that size that you're doing. You don't want a tiny brush to do a huge sky. It will take you forever. See that bead of paint there? We're going to dab into that, pick that bead up, take it back to the other side. Little bead of paint, pick it up, overlap and come back the other side. So that's our first wash, our first flat wash, and we're just going to see that bead at the end. It's left a little bead of paint there. If I was doing this as a very pink sky, I wouldn't want that bead of darker paint at the end. So I'm just going to take my brush, clean it off, and just very gently touch into that little bead and let the brush soak it up. Just trying to achieve the perfect flat wash. So we're going to let that carry on and dry, and whilst that's happening we'll go on to our second wash. Isn't that a beautiful colour? The paints I'm using, by the way, are my own brand. I formulated these paints and they're handmade in the traditional way, and if you pop over to my website you'll be able to order some for yourself. They're professional grade, made with honey in them as well, which allows them to pre-wet really easily. Anyway, on to our next demo. Clean water this time, guys, and we are going to work wet into wet. Wet the paper thoroughly. I'm going to wet it all the way up to the masking tape. And you want, when you're wetting the paper, to work wet in wet. You want a nice even coat of water on your paper. I want you to bend your head down. If I lift this up to the camera, you can see the gloss there. Can you see the light reflecting on the paper as I wiggle that up and down? That's what you want. You're looking for that lovely sheen, but what you also don't want is any random puddles, because that's going to affect how even your paint goes on. just got a little hair from my brush there. Okay, so we're going to go exactly the same again. Oops. Load up your brush, left to right. Now what will happen, because we have water on the page, is as soon as your brush touches down, the paint is going to swim. That's a good description. It's going to swim around in the water that's on the surface of the paper. Side to side, remember to reload your brush and come back the other way, pick up that bubble and across and reload your brush. You're going to get two very different looks. They're both flat washes, they're both successful. It's just which one you prefer and which you find easier. Now, 9 times out of 10, I'll use the wet in wet technique, predominantly because it gives you more time to work. When you're working wet on to dry, the paint's going to dry quite quickly, so you're more prone to have streaks in your painting than if you work wet on to wet, like we have here. So again, we need to allow that to dry, and then we'll compare the two when they're both dry. You will notice obviously this one's lighter, and that's been affected again by the amount of water that's on the paper, because it's diluting the paint as you go. So if you want something really dark, you need to take your initial paint wash darker. Okay, the next one I'm going to do is the same again, but I'm going to raise the paper. So I'm just going to use my masking tape to lift my pad. Up we go. So I've got a slope, which is going to encourage the water and the paint to float down the paper. I'll try not to paint Bailey. I'm not sure if he's interested or bored. We're going to do the same as the second one again. We're going to pre-wet the paper nice and even. These are really good exercises to do. Use all the colours that you want to. Try some skies. And I'm going to show you another trick in a moment. Well, not trick, another exercise for you to do. Because this is all well and good when you've just got a big expanse that you want to be one colour. What happens when you've got objects in the way? We'll come on to that very shortly. Okay, it's the same again. My paper's wet, it's nice and smooth. Just checking there's no puddles. We don't want those pesky puddles. Load up my brush. In we go. Across. Remember to overlap. You always need to overlap. Pick up that puddle, that little bead of paint, and come back the other way. Now the little bit of extra help we're getting here is from gravity. If I stop painting now, you can see that paint start to run down the page on its own. We're not having to do all of the work. We're being assisted by nature. There's that bead again. Pick it up and overlap. Pick up the bead, overlap, and back. It's very relaxing. It's a lovely cathartic thing to do to while away a few hours. And there we go. Now, because my paper's lifted, I'm going to get a dark line along the bottom. We can see it forming now. Watercolour is very good at having a lovely crispy edge where wet paint meets dry paper, and that's what we've got happening here. Gravity is bringing the water down, so I'm getting this dark line along there. Could look really nice on a horizon actually, against the dark sea or something like that. But if you don't want that dark line, clean your brush out very, very gently. Just take your brush along, and your brush is now acting like a little sponge and soaking that extra pigment up. There we go. 3 washes. We'll let them fully dry, and then we'll come back and have a look at how all 3 have turned out and which one you think is your favourite. Sorry, Bailey. Whilst they're drying, I just want to show you an example. So this is an ink and wash painting, and this is with a graded wash in the sky. This is what I've really explained to you what a graded wash is. So you're going from dark down to light on the horizon. And sometimes you may take it the other way. In some stormy skies I've painted, it's been really dark near the buildings, going lighter. So sometimes we've got objects to avoid. Or we've got animals to avoid. So this is a variegated wash where I've used different colours dropped in and creating a pattern in the wash. So it's not just a flat colour, it's different tones. So we're going to come on to show you how to do that. But the same principle, I've got a big object called a panda in this one. So how do you get that smooth wash when you're working around an object? I'm just going to grab another sheet of paper over here, which I've also sectioned off. I've got a big section up this end. I'm going to put this flat because I want to have more control. I'm not going to have it running down. And we'll just grab a pencil. I'll take a dark pencil, soft pencil so you can see, and we'll sketch in very loosely a bear. Let's pop him in there. Obviously we don't need to worry about the face of the bear. I just want to have a basic shape for you to work with. Now, let me talk you through some of the problems you'll have when you're painting around an object. If we use the first demonstration, wet on to dry, as you're working around one side of the bear, you've got the challenge of keeping everything equally wet as you work round. So you are very prone and likely to have streaks and patches. Whereas if we help ourselves and buy ourselves a bit more time, we can use the water, which will prolong the life of the paint, stop you getting patches, and you won't have that panic that you would if you're working on to dry. So I'm going to take my clean water. It's a little bit pinky tinged, but at least you'll see where I'm putting it. And I'm very carefully going to go round my bear with the clean water, using the point of my brush to guide around the bear's face. You don't want the water to go on the object that you're painting around. Watercolour is very obedient. It loves water. The clue's in the name, really. And if you get water in the object that you're trying to avoid, the paint will follow. It's, as I say, it's very obedient, and it will just go that way. It will look for the water and it will follow it. So I'm getting a nice even coat of water. I'm going to go right up to the edge of my page. Here we go. And we'll do a bit just to prove it. I'm going to put a bit of water on his shoulder here. I've accidentally not noticed, and there's some water gone onto the bear. I'm going to use blue for this, a bit more natural. So this is my Phthalo blue, if you're interested in the paints that I'm using. This is Phthalo blue green shade, one of my primary colours. Load up your brush, not too much water on it. You've got all the water you need in this puddle. And then I'm going to start using the tip of my brush, coming around the edge of our bear. Just using that point to guide me round. Here we go, round the ears and around the top. Now at this point, if you was working wet on to dry, you would be panicking about the top and that this was drying. Now we know we've got a bit more time on our hands. This is a flat wash we're doing. So I'm reloading my brush. The other good thing about working wet into wet this way is it doesn't really matter what way your brush stroke is. If you're working wet on to dry, it's important that your brush stroke is uniform. Here, because the paint is travelling in the water, it doesn't matter. You can be quite random with how you're applying that paint. We'll quickly come round the other side. Mix a little. What did I say at the beginning? Make sure you mix enough paint. You don't want to run out. Here we go. Around his head and coming down that shoulder. Now this is the side that I accidentally spilt some water on and didn't spot. So we're going to see what happens. Reloaded my brush. Haphazardly, if you like, painting on that flat wash. And now look what's happening on my bare shoulder. The paint is following the water. So I've got a little bleed. Sometimes I'll do this on purpose for an effect that I'm looking for. But just so that's the point, just be careful and take your time when you're putting your water on the paper ready for that wet in wet technique. So what I would do here to solve this is take a damp brush and come in and soak up that paint. You're never going to get the paper back to white, but I'm drying out the paper and lifting that colour off to correct that little error. Okay, so we've got our silhouetted bear, quite cute and very flat wash. So whilst we're looking at this, can I show you what can go wrong? If you add too much water on your brush, or you accidentally are going from your water pot to your paint, you might drop some water on. So let me show you. This is a disaster, by the way, but you need to know about the disasters. So I'm going to tap my brush now and drop some water, accidentally splashed into that background. I'm going to lift that up so you can see better. Can you see that? The water is a great tool in itself when you're creating effects. And if I was doing a penguin scene where I wanted an icy background, this is a really good, cool trick to use. So just dropped water droplets in there, and you can see they're dispersing the paint and they're pushing the paint out and creating these white spots. So I'm quite lucky. If this was a real painting, everything's still wet. I've still got time to go back in and redo my wash. But if it was further on in the process, you're kind of stumped. So just be careful about dropping wet water. I don't think you can get dry water, but dropping water onto your wash. Okay, let's pop our bear back to one side and come back to these washes we did earlier. So let's just make some notes. And this is a good thing for you to do. Write some notes, what colour you use. So this was magenta. And this was wet on dry. And then we have magenta again, wet on wet. And that was flat. And we have wet on wet, raised. So let's have a look at these. That's the first one, wet on dry. It's pretty good, I have to say. But I prefer this middle one. It's very smooth. The water has bought me that time. And then on the raised one, I don't really have an issue with the raised one. The one thing to watch with the raised one is sometimes if you're doing a sky, it can look like rain running as the paint runs down. Really depends how much water you've got on your brush, as well as how much water's in your puddle and how much water's on the page, as to how far the paint's going to move. So you can do these swatches and keep them, and then when you come to do a painting you can refer back to them. So it's a really good thing to have. Okay, so the next wash I wanted to show you is the graded wash or graduated wash. So we'll bring our bear back. Excuse me, Bailey, can you mind your paws? Thank you. And we're going to do a graded wash. Okay, I'm going to go back to my pink. I think I'm liking the pink. Back to the magenta. Make another puddle. Lovely pile of paint to play with. So we're going to do wet on dry and a wet on wet. I'm going to do them both flat this time. Okay, so we're going to start in the same way as we did For the flat wash, we're going to take our loaded brush across the paper to one side, pick up that bead and come back the other way. Pick up that bead and come back the other way. Now at this point, I'm going to clean my brush out, stroke the brush on the side of your pot to get rid of the excess water, and then I'm going to come back in, pick up that paint. So just go back into the paint, and we're using the paint that we've already applied to the paper. Now I should be able to carry on doing this. I just need a bit more water. My brush is drying out. I can feel it pulling against the paper. Just keep going with just adding water each time, and you get that lovely graded wash. Like it's really good for sunsets, sunrises, that kind of thing. And secondly, you will have to excuse my water now, it's very pink. I'm going to wet the paper first this time. And we're going to let that water help us with our graduated wash. It's not that any of these are wrong or right, just different for different purposes depending on what you're painting. So on this one, just going to let that sink in a little bit more. Make sure it's nice and smooth when you add your water, my pink water in this case. Load up your brush. Same way you're going to start, come across, see that bead, pick it up and work it down. Clean your brush out. Now if you wanted to raise this at this point, again, I want you to look, can you see that? That paint, here it comes. Coming down, running down the page. I'm going to go back in, just overlap and come down. Bit more water on my brush, work that down, all the way down. I don't need to load the brush with water so many times. I quite like this little effect that's going on here. Now one thing you shouldn't do when you're doing a wash like this is to be tempted to go back in too quickly with your brush, because if I thought, oh, that's not smoothed out there, I'm going to go again over it. You can end up picking up more paint than you're actually spreading. So just be careful you don't end up sucking that paint up. There we go. Beautiful variegated wash. And I'd say this is one that you'll use far more than you will a flat, but it's great to be good at both and to practice both of those. Well, whilst we've got these colours on here, I can talk to you about the variegated wash. So this is where we'll put another colour in and we'll have more of a mottled effect, much like I showed you in my panda painting here. And I do use this method an awful lot. So whilst this is still wet, I'm going to go back in with my pink, and this time I'm just going to have some fun and bounce that brush around into the water and create a pattern. Now what happens with watercolour paint, when you spread it out, let's do it here, from side to side, you're spreading the pigment out and you're creating an even colour. When you dab on and lift off, like so, little dots, you're creating these tiny puddles of strong pigment, which are going to move around in the water, but it's going to give you that very variegated look. Can't speak today. Okay, let's add some yellow to this. Grab some of my Hansa. This is Hansa yellow, my third of my primary colours. So Hansa yellow, Phthalo blue and Quinacradome magenta. And then in I'm going to go. I'm just going to place some yellow randomly, bouncing my brush, having fun, and letting these colours work together in the water. Just adding a little bit of water to my brush now, and dropping some water on as well to get some cool effects where these colours blend. And you can tip it up, you can encourage those colours to run, to blend together, to mix together. and you create your variegated wash. Great fun to do, really great to use in backgrounds if you like painting animals, if you like doing woodland scenes, that kind of thing. You can create some out of focus trees using that technique. So have some fun, work on your swatches, try these different techniques. Let me know how you get on. You can comment down below. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe and hit the like button. It means so much. And you can have a look at some of my other videos on the channel. Enjoy, and I will see you very soon. Take care. Bye. Hi. I've forgotten what I'm going to say. What am I going to say? Hi everyone, in today's video I'm going to be talking to you about how to achieve the perfect wash. Great. Hello. Hi everyone, and in today's video I'm going to be talking to you about the wash. What is a wash and different ways that you can use them. Great, why can't I think of the word? A great asset, a great tool. What is it? A technique, that's the word.